If there's one thing the past couple of years have taught us, it's that behaviour really, really loves licensed chapters. The last year of DBD gave us a 2-to-1 ratio of licensed content to originals, a ratio that will continue into next year. And as we burn through them, conversation inevitably sparks among the fanbase about the idea of a sequel licensed chapter where behaviour goes back for another go at a licensed IP we've already touched on, with more to offer than just one chapter could convey. Resident Evil Project W has shown that behaviour are willing to do this, and ever since it came out we've had so many discussions about a second Saw chapter with Mark Hoffman, or a second Silent Hill chapter with Walter or the Missionary, or even a third RE chapter with characters from the Winters saga. You all know which one I'm rooting for. But there's one licensed IP that Dead by Daylight could go back to at any time. One of the highest quality and best regarded horror series in Hollywood that would be a perfect candidate for a second chapter. Because despite adding a character to the game, it didn't really get a first chapter to begin with. Evil Dead, represented in DVD by the Ashver Has Evil Dead TV series, is one of the long-term mainstays of the genre ever since the 80s horror renaissance brought on by Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th. It consists of 5 movies: The Evil Dead in 1981, Evil Dead 2 in 1987, Army of Darkness in 1992, Evil Dead in 2013, and Evil Dead Rise in 2023. Alongside one TV show, Ashver Has Evil Dead, that aired for 3 seasons between 2015 and 2018. A year after the show's cancellation, in 2019, Ash arrived as a survivor in Dead by Daylight, featuring the likeness and voice of Bruce Campbell himself. And at the time, Ash's arrival drew a fair amount of acclaim from franchise fans, but 2019 was 6 years ago now. If you ask me, I think we can do better for one of horror's best franchises than 3 questionable perks and a few voice lines in the lobby. So today we're putting the Evil Dead franchise under the microscope to see what more it could offer to Dead by Daylight. We'll be going through potential candidates for a killer and a map to join Ash in the fog, and taking a look at a second round of survivor options too, to bring the other iconic characters from the movies and show to life in the game we all know and love. And rounding out as is tradition, with a power concept and perk concepts for my chosen characters. 1981's The Evil Dead was the debut feature film of the would-be B-movie power couple Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell. Childhood friends who decided to scrape together a bare-bones cast and crew and make a horror movie that defined a subgenre. The Evil Dead followed in the traditions of splattery exploitation flicks, like A Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Last House on the Left, and The Hills Have Eyes, that take uncompromising and brutal perspectives on violence, and many of the tropes and ideas it brought to the table have become iconic in horror to the point of cliché. The abandoned cabin in the woods, the chainsaw and sawn-off shotgun, the cursed evil book bound in human skin. Even if you've never seen the movie, even if you don't know where they're from, you'll recognise these things are horror movie things that Evil Dead added to the standard horror movie toolbox. It's hard to stress just how much of a complete clown fiesta the original Evil Dead production was, between the cast and crew getting injured or sick routinely because of the horrific conditions at the cabin, the contact lenses and prosthetics driving the actors insane, and Sam Raimi poking Bruce Campbell's leg injury with a stick for fun. The 12 weeks the cast and crew spent on set would not have passed modern safety standards, but it definitely made an impression. Especially when Stephen King watched the film and his endorsement of it saw it hit theatres across America and beyond. It was not a movie without controversy, mind you. It got restricted in the UK as one of the video nasties, alongside other grindhouse horror movies, but that just served to propel its reputation even further among horror audiences. Of course, with any successful horror picture comes a shower of sequels, but Evil Dead didn't fall into the sequel trap that has plagued many of its horror contemporaries like Halloween or Nightmare on Elm Street. Because many of these movies fell into the trap of treading over old ground too much, staying too close to established successes, and that means the sequels kind of mushed together into a mediocre derivative slop. Can you really tell me the substantial differences between Nightmare on Elm Street 5 and Nightmare on Elm Street 6? But every time something new has come out of Evil Dead, it truly is something new. We went from the straight-laced horror of the first film, to the madcap horror comedy of Evil Dead 2, to the fantasy action comedy that is Army of Darkness, to the splattery and apocalyptic return to roots in Evil Dead 2013, to the nail-biting urban family drama of Evil Dead Rise. And the show mixes the tone of Evil Dead 2 with an Ash that's grown and developed since Army of Darkness, to create a truly excellent horror comedy that blends the best bits of the Ash Williams era. There's no big scary slasher who just won't stay dead. No endless rehashing of the original story. Evil Dead's only recurring features are the Necronomicon, the Deadites, and in some capacity Ash Williams. The form and tone and direction they take could not be more different between installments. This constant reinvention of itself means that, in my opinion, Evil Dead has the highest consistent quality standard of any of the historic horror series. Even the golden child of modern horror, Scream, is weighed down by Scream 3. Every single installment in the Evil Dead series is consistently great, while also being different enough from each other, which is impressive for a series that's been going on for 40 years and is still going strong today. With such a vaunted heritage, it's hard to argue that Evil Dead never belonged in DBD. Despite never having quite the mass market appeal of Halloween, Nightmare or Scream, Evil Dead has been a consistent source of quality horror pictures that genuinely change the game. The original Ash Williams trilogy are the origins of far more tropes and ideas than most people give them credit for, and horror wouldn't be the same without them. That variety and consistent quality might have been what makes Evil Dead such a timelessly amazing series, but weirdly that might also have made potentially integrating it fully in Dead by Daylight quite complicated, at least when compared to a normal licensed release, because most of DBD's licensed releases make their killer choice pretty obvious. If they're not the series' main recurring villain that's in every installment, like Michael Myers or Freddy Krueger, they're taken from whichever installment in the series the fans generally consider to be the good one, like Pyramid Head or Nemesis. Evil Dead's potential killers, and there is plenty of them, struggle to fit the formula because they're all good, meaning they all have their fans and would all be about as popular as each other as killer candidates. But because they don't tend to come back for future installments, you can't just pick the one that keeps showing up and becomes a fan favourite due to sheer exposure. The closest thing we have to a recurring threat is the Kandarian Demon, which is the main threat in the first film and continuously appears throughout the series, possessing people and creating Deadites. But it doesn't have a corporeal form and tends to operate through proxies and possess bodies like Henrietta or Evil Ash to do its dirty work. This diverse cast of villains, monsters and demons was one of the key selling points of Evil Dead the game, the asymmetrical looter shooter published by Saber Interactive in 2022. I loved Evil Dead the game. I made several videos on it from the game's release up until Saber stopped active development on the game after about 18 months, and the series' long history of different big bads throughout the movies and the show gave it a solid range of options for that game's killer side. We got 5 choices here. The possessed Henrietta Nobi from Evil Dead 2, the Witch and Evil Ash from Army of Darkness, and the Demon Lords Eligos and Baal from Ash vs Evil Dead. And while the game's untimely demise meant that development stopped once Baal came out, there was definitely room for more demons to be added, like Lem the fire-breathing Deadite from Season 1 of the show, or the Marauder from the newest movie in the series, Evil Dead Rise. What this kind of demonstrates here is that Evil Dead has so many potential killers that they were able to fill their own asymmetrical game with them, any of which could work in DBD, and that may have been one of the reasons that Behaviour didn't make a killer when they first did their Evil Dead crossover. There's just too many choices to make all of the fans happy. But if you were to get an Evil Dead crossover in DBD today, there's a tool that Behaviour has now in 2025 that they didn't have back in 2019. Legendary Cosmetics. With Legendary Cosmetics, players can have their cake and eat it too, because while only one character can be represented in a default killer look, the other candidates could fill the roster out as legendaries. Imagine we got, say, Ruby as our killer, but legendary skins were kicking around for Baal, Evil Ash, Eligos, the Abomination, the Marauder. Then everybody who likes all of these characters could still get to play them while taking up only one killer slot. I'll talk more about how this interacts with the power later, but since we're on the topic of character choices, it might be a good time now to discuss survivors. The only recurring character in the Evil Dead series is Bruce Campbell's Ash Williams. In some capacity, he's in every single installment. He's the lead in the first 3 movies and the TV show named after him, and he has cameo appearances in Evil Dead 2013 and Evil Dead Rise. Ash is one of the most iconic horror protagonists ever, up there with Ellen Ripley and Laurie Strode, and him coming to DBD in the Evil Dead paragraph was a long time coming. The only reason I wouldn't immediately recommend Ash as the best and only choice for a full Evil Dead chapter is because we already have him, and similar to the killer cast, that makes the Evil Dead survivor choices very open, potentially too open for Behaviour to easily choose any one character. It's not usual for anyone not called Ash Williams to survive an Evil Dead movie. The overwhelming majority of characters are introduced in one movie and will wind up as Deadite fodder in that same movie before the credits roll, to the point that by the TV show, Ash vs Evil Dead, Ash winds up isolating himself completely, because he's tired of constantly losing everybody he gets close to. These losses include all his friends and his sister in the cabin in the first movie, Annie Nobi in the second, and in the TV show his love interest Amanda, his father Brock, his childhood friend Chet, and his daughter's mother Candy are all added to the body count. This high attrition rate, at least until the show came out, means that of Evil Dead's many non-Ash leads and supporting characters, there's only a few that I would consider suitable for the survivor role in the Evil Dead chapter. In my opinion, any lead or primary supporting character who doesn't get turned into a Deadite would fit, because we'll spend enough time with them in the source media to care about them, and fans have been exposed enough to them to increase the odds of them being recognised enough to propel chapter sales. With that in mind, my list of possible survivors is as follows: Mia and David Allard from 2013's Evil Dead, Beth Bixler from Evil Dead Rise, and Pablo Simon Bolivar, Kelly Maxwell, or Brandy Barr Williams from the Ash vs Evil Dead TV show. Any of these I think would do well as survivors. They all last long enough in their respective media to make an impression on audiences, and similar to the killer idea, any of them could be good legendaries for each other should we want representation from their part in the franchise, but not want them as their own survivor. I have a killer and survivor in mind, which I'll get into in a moment, but before we continue, there's something I feel the need to point out. When we originally got Ash in DBD, we specifically got the Ash vs Evil Dead license and got that iteration of Ash in the game, which matters a lot, because the rights surrounding Evil Dead's various installments are all different kinds of complicated, and were even more complicated when the Evil Dead paragraph was written out in 2019. Renaissance Pictures is Sam Raimi's production company, who hold the rights to Evil Dead as an IP, and have been behind the production of every movie. But the rights to each individual film, and the show specifically, were, until recently, all divvied up between different studios and distributors beyond Renaissance itself. That's why the game was so hard to produce. It had characters from all throughout the series interacting with each other, which created a complete legal shit show that Saber had to untangle to make Evil Dead the game function. That's why Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness both have recaps of the preceding movies, because at the time of production they technically didn't have any rights to make direct sequels. It's why the Ash vs Evil Dead TV show couldn't legally reference Army of Darkness in the first season of the show, because it didn't have the rights yet. And it's why we couldn't get any Evil Dead 2013 content for the game until we got Castle Kandar and The Witch, because the Army of Darkness rights holders threw a shit fit and demanded Saber prioritise their IP or else they wouldn't play ball and give the rights over. Thankfully, it's all a lot simpler now than it used to be. At the end of 2024, Renaissance Pictures and Studio Canal got together distribution rights to the entire series. So now the same people hold entirely the rights to the first two movies, the two new ones, and the TV show. The only outlier is Army of Darkness, which is still owned by MGM, but it does mean that if we were to get more Evil Dead content in DBD, it would almost certainly have nothing to do with Army of Darkness, and might even be limited just to the show, depending on the details of the arrangement with Behaviour signed in 2019. So there's a lot of complications associated with the idea of an Evil Dead chapter in the future. The killer and survivor candidates are many and varied to the point of being spoiled for choice, the rights are a complete mess, and the most important character in the whole series is already in Dead by Daylight. So the question here is, why am I still banging on about it? Why does making a full Evil Dead chapter still matter when there's so many licenses out there and originals still yet to be made? Well, I've talked about how Evil Dead has remained a paragon of quality in horror filmmaking over the past 40 years of projects, and how unmatched its influence has been over that time. But the series is still alive and well. If anything, for such an old series, it's more alive than it's ever been. The newest installment, Evil Dead Rise, has been the best received in the series so far, with rave reviews from audiences worldwide. And there are two new movies in production. Evil Dead Burn from Infested director Sebastian Vanecek is due for release in July next year. An untitled movie by Last Stop in Yuma County director Francis Galuppi is also in the pipeline to follow. Sam and Ivan Raimi got together recently to make a series bible, making sure that Evil Dead is a franchise ready for the future. They want to see an Evil Dead movie in cinemas every few years now, rather than the once a decade they were doing before. And that's not even taking into account the fourth season of Ash vs Evil Dead, which is being revived in the fourth animated show. And Bruce and Sam expressing their desires to reunite and make a new Evil Dead film together, bringing Bruce out of retirement to play Ash again in live action. Even the game is still playable. It might have died an undignified death, but in true Evil Dead fashion it's still shambling on, even after it got delisted from a lot of online stores. Saber have kept the servers up. You can still find matches, and despite Saber actively ceasing development on the game, it's still got more players on Steam, its smallest platform by the way, than Killer Clowns does. The game might functionally be a walking corpse, but Evil Dead is stronger than ever. And especially if Evil Dead Burn is good or that animated revival gets off the ground, we're about to enter a golden age of Evil Dead, as a powerhouse of horror cinema again. Missing out on that era because we already got Ash 6 years ago would be just kind of weird and awful, both from a business perspective and from the idea of DBD feeling complete. After all, Resident Evil got a second chapter and a shitload of skins and may well even get more content, but Evil Dead just gets a survivor? That doesn't seem fair. Let's not also forget that many feel like Ash in DBD has kind of been done a disservice. In a lot of ways, Ash was ahead of his time, with voice lines in the lobby and the likeness of Bruce Campbell, but these features and additions haven't aged well when compared to modern DBD releases. Ash only has a few voice lines and they're only in the menu instead of in the trials proper like the new survivors. His likeness has not aged well in DBD's new engine, especially looking at the other licensed survivors, let alone how he looked in Evil Dead the game. And he has the unique honour of being the only survivor who has caused unhealthy meta problems with all 3 of his teachable perks. Ash is a survivor who is in many ways showing his age. But thanks to his appearances in Tome 15, in both the Rift Cosmetics and in the lore, we can see that the Evil Dead rights holder's relationship with behaviour clearly isn't the worst. So why not get a proper chapter and revisit Evil Dead with all the modern polish we expect from a licensed chapter these days? I realised something interesting the other day. When the November licensed chapter dropped with 2 survivors and 1 killer, it will have been 2 years on the button since our last licensed chapter based on a horror movie. Chucky was our last one, the rest have been games or shows, so, an Evil Dead chapter would definitely be a nice addition for that reason alone. So with that in mind, who do I suggest for the survivor and killer choices? Well, here's my comment about horror movies is going to bite me in the ass a bit, because most of the good candidates are in fact from the TV show. Assuming Army of Darkness is off the table, because it's owned by a different studio, so no Evil Ash, our options include Henrietta Nobi from Evil Dead 2, the Abomination from Evil Dead 2013, the Marauder from Evil Dead Rise, and Ruby, Baal, and Eligos, who are all from the TV show. Which character you'd choose here would depend on a multitude of factors, whether you'd want Ruby as a killer, for example, or as a potential survivor, since she qualifies for both at various points, whether behaviour would want a killer more closely tied to Ash, which would probably disqualify the Abomination and the Marauder, or whether Lucy Lawless or Joel Tobeck would want to reprise their roles and give their licenses and voice work over to behaviour. For what it's worth, in Evil Dead the game, Lucy Lawless did return for Ruby, but Saber had to recast Joel Tobeck as the face and voice of Baal. If I had to think of what behaviour might go for in the event that we got a full Evil Dead chapter, my money would be on Henrietta. Since behaviour does love their classic villains, and Henrietta is recognised both from Evil Dead 2, which is widely considered the defining instalment of the whole series, as well as in Season 2 of the show. But the fun part is, it kind of doesn't matter that much, because regardless of who Ash has to fight at the end of the movie, or end of the season, the evil tends to operate in the same way each time. In every appearance, the Kandarian demon possesses victims before killing them, and adding their possessed bodies to its army of evil. The only real difference is that in some cases, the big bad guy is some sort of super deadite, possessed by the evil itself, like Henrietta, Evil Ash, or the Marauder. But in other cases, they're a powerful demonic entity unto themselves, who can command evil or display their own version of its power. Think characters like Ruby, Eligos, the Abomination, or Baal. So what I was saying earlier about legendary cosmetics works really well here. As long as the power creates deadites and possesses people, it really could belong to anyone. This is the core gameplay loop for Demon in Evil Dead the game, and each of the demon's individual power sets and units are designed to express different elements of those characters within the confines of the broad create deadites and possess people umbrella. Eligos, for example, is the best at possessions, which makes sense as his possession of Kelly is the most memorable moment in the show, whereas Baal specialises in spreading fear and making survivors paranoid, before taking to the field himself and cutting people apart with his claw. That's what he does in the second season of the show. This makes the legendary skin thing I was talking about earlier seem even more compelling as an idea. If you have a general demon power, playing on this angle of creating deadites and possessing people, and pick one of the big bads as the killer, you could easily staple any legendary skin from any one of them, and it'll still feel authentic, especially if the deadites change between characters to reflect that. The biggest examples I think here for potential fun flair are Baal, whose deadites are traditionally flayed of their skin, or Ruby, whose own minions could be replaced with her twisted, black-eyed children from Season 2 of the show. And here's where I'm going to mix my own personal preferences in, because everyone just loves it when my personal opinion gets involved in these things. Yes, I have said that Henrietta would probably be the best choice for behaviour to go for, but I'm going to pick Elagos instead from season 1 of the show for a couple of reasons. First of all, DBD players love their weird monster boys like Dredge and Unknown, and Elagos is easily the least human-looking threat in Evil Dead history. DBD already has the rights to Ash vs Evil Dead show, so presumably it would be easier to get Elagos than it would be to have, say, Henrietta or the Marauder added from another instalment. The way he's animated is super unique, and translates very well to a video game, as we can see in Elagos' boss form, and despite not appearing for too long, Elagos made an incredible impression during season 1 of the show. There's a reason that Elagos is one of the starting 3 characters in Evil Dead the game alongside the iconic Henrietta and Evil Ash. He's a fan favourite for lovers of the show, and a lot of the people I've seen have been really hoping that Elagos gets more time in the spotlight, maybe even as the villain of his own Evil Dead movie someday. And if it would help at all, Behaviour probably wouldn't have to get the likeness rights or the original VA back either. They could just cast Kellen Goff again like the game did and have done with it. Oh yeah, and he was my main in that game, by the way, in case you were under any illusions about how rampantly biased I am for this guy. That just leaves 3 survivors and a map. And here I think the choice is a little bit more clear. It's the cabin. It's obviously the cabin. Just put the cabin in the middle of the Red Forest, make the tape play when you finish the generator, make the basement door slam with Henrietta banging at it, and then just make the rest of the map an outdoor woodland. There you go, bish bash bosh, cabin done. Now let's talk about survivors, because this is where things get a bit more interesting. At the end of the show's last season, Ash effectively leaves behind a successor. Someone who started the show out at Ash's side and grew to become one of the most interesting characters in Evil Dead history. Someone uniquely suited to fighting the forces of evil, and who has literally died twice to liberate the world from evil, only to come back stronger than ever, both times. I'm talking of course about El Brujo Especial, Pablo Simón Bolívar. Pablo, played by Ray Santiago, is in many ways the heart and soul of Ash vs Evil Dead. He starts off as the most normal member of Ash's little crew, trying to force himself into the role of the action-packed Deadite-killing badass that his mentor Ash and friend and love interest Kelly fill so easily. But over time, after Ruby bonds him with the Necronomicon and turns him into a powerful vessel, bringing her demon children into the world, Pablo becomes directly entwined with the occult side of the Necronomicon, becoming a skilled shaman capable of exorcising Baal in Season 2, and opening gateways to Limbo to bring back Kelly and Brandy from the dead in Season 3. Pablo became a support in Evil Dead the game, whose knowledge of the arcane shows him specialising in protective amulets, and his dabblings into the spirit world allow him to move undetected by the forces of evil. This is the kind of thing a survivor is made of. Pablo wouldn't be our first Mystic survivor, but he'd be our first licensed one. And I could see some really fascinating perk designs involving creating mystical wards or hiding from evil using the arcane power of El Brujo Especial. There's even a good lore reason for him to be in the fog. Ash's DBD lore implies that the Necronomicon contains a spell that invokes the entity. That's what took Ash in the first place. So if Pablo harnesses that connection that he has with the Necronomicon, he could feasibly do the same thing, following Ash into the fog in an attempt to rescue him. Of course, this opens the door to a bunch of potential legendaries. From the show alone, we have got Kelly, who's almost as well suited to the fog as Pablo himself is, to the point that she could be her own survivor. Ash's daughter Brandy. We've got Ruby, if Behaviour wanted to take her from her good timeline in Season 2. We could have Amanda Fisher to add to DBD's cop roster. Even Ash's dad Brock wouldn't be out of the question. Imagine the aura of loading into a lobby with 4 P100 Brocks waiting for you. Oh, you know you're getting walked like a dog. Of course, there's plenty of survivor choices from elsewhere in the series too, many of whom could easily be their own survivors if they came with the appropriate killer. Jane Levy's Mia could square off with Evil Dead 2013's Abomination, or a Beth Bixler survivor to square off with Evil Dead Rises Marauder. Wherever you'd pick as the killer would influence the survivor choices. I like the combo of Elagos and Pablo personally, but truthfully there's so many options for both, I wouldn't fault you for wanting something completely different. But what would the killer and survivor of my choice actually do? Let me talk you through my perk and power concepts of Pablo Simón Bolívar and Elagos the Demon, inspired heavily by Evil Dead the game, of course. Elagos the Demon has a standard sized terror radius and movement speed, and is a tall height killer with the power from Hell's Heart. The demon starts in their standard demon form, and can press the power button to enter or leave spirit form at any time. Entering or leaving spirit form takes 1 second, and the demon cannot move while leaving spirit form. Spirit form is invisible, With 150% speed and a 40 meter terror radius, has no red light and can only be perceived through the terror radius. In this form, it cannot attack survivors, but it can break pallets, generators, and breakable walls, and move through windows and drop pallets without penalty. A spirit form demon moving through a Hellgate will manually trigger it, spawning a Deadite. But of course, what are Hellgates? The demon can hold M2 to send out a marker like a pinhead chain. At that marker location, a Hellgate will spawn. Hellgates are invisible but shimmer like wraith to any survivors within 12 meters of one. Survivors move within 6 meters of a Hellgate will scream and spawn a Deadite. There can be no more than 8 Hellgates on the map. Hellgates spawn Deadites when a survivor or spirit form demon moves through one. Spawn Deadites will run towards the nearest survivor they can see, at 100% speed. When a non-possessed Deadite attacks any survivor, they're not harmed, but instead scream and are pushed 4 meters away from the Deadite. Deadites last 5 seconds, after which they will despawn if they are not possessed by the demon. When a Deadite is running while a demon is in spirit form or demon form, the demon will gain Killer Instinct and can select it to possess it for as long as it is active. A possessed Deadite has standard terror radius and movement speed. Whenever a possessed Deadite hits a healthy survivor, From Hell's Heart gains 20 charges. On hitting an injured survivor, the power gains 10. Possessed Deadites move and act like a standard killer with a special attack, Death Frenzy. After 1.5 seconds of charging up Death Frenzy, slowing health 90% speed for the duration, the Deadite will rush forwards, flailing its arms for 4 seconds and moving at 140% speed. If Death Frenzy connects with a drop pallet, it will break it immediately. If Death Frenzy connects with a survivor, they will lose a health state. If Death Frenzy hits a wall, hits nothing, or Deadite is stunned by a pallet, the demon will be forced to relinquish control of the Deadite after 4 seconds. During this time, the demon can select any Hellgate it can see on the map using M2 to spawn and possess a new Deadite from it, or press the power button to relinquish control early and put themselves into spirit form. At 50 charges, a demon can press M2 on any survivor within 8 meters to possess them from spirit form. This will drain all charges of From Hell's Heart. Possessing people is a key feature of the Evil Dead franchise. Part of the horror of these movies is knowing you have to fight anyone the evil kills, and the emotional damage that killing your friends and family can do to you. Evil Dead the game lets survivors get possessed if their fear threshold was high enough, letting you make them shoot and attack your allies while they could only watch in horror. But critically, it didn't last long. Your teammates could just shoot the possessed body to force the demon out, and as such, any possession mechanic in Dead by Daylight would need a similar failsafe, so the survivor who got possessed isn't just sitting around twiddling their thumbs doing nothing until they can play the game again. So let me talk to you about survivor possession and the Kandarian Dagger. When a survivor becomes possessed, the demon takes control of their character completely. Possession takes 1.5 seconds to complete. When it begins, all survivors within the terror radius scream. A possessed survivor moves at 150% speed for 3 seconds after getting possessed, before slowing down to 120% speed, can vault pallets and windows at a survivor's normal speed, and can attack other survivors, with a normal killer attack range and cooldowns. Every time the possessed survivor secures a hit on another survivor, the movement speed increases by 10% until the possession ends. Survivor possession lasts for 90 seconds, or until the possessed survivor collects the Kandarian Dagger from Limbo, whichever comes first. But what does the possessed survivor do when this happens? When a survivor becomes possessed, they are transported to Limbo, an alternate version of the map they are currently playing on with no players or pallets on it. The Kandarian Dagger will spawn in a random location on that map, 56 meters or more from their location where possible, and will become visible within 24 meters of it. When the survivor collects the dagger, the possession will end and they regain control of their character in the real world, and the demon will return to where the possession started, in spirit form. If 90 seconds pass and the survivor has not collected the dagger yet, they return to their character and put directly into the dying state, as the demon racks their body with agony and spawns over their downed body in demon form. And I have a list of add-ons here as well. And you know what? Because I couldn't resist, here's some perks as well for the demon and Pablo Simon Bolivar. Our first perk is Kandarian Fury. Whenever the killer becomes stunned or blinded, Kandarian Fury activates for a short time. During Kandarian Fury, the killer's lunge attack breaks pallets and breakable walls on contact. Kandarian Fury goes on cooldown for 45 seconds once this period ends. Our second perk is called Swallow Your Soul. Whenever a survivor becomes exhausted while Swallow Your Soul is inactive, it activates for 40 seconds. When Swallow Your Soul activates, the exhausted survivor screams, and basic attacks during this time inflict broken for a short period. Swallow Your Soul has a 30-second cooldown before it can activate again. And our last killer perk is Scourge Hook Immortal Evil. 4 hooks on the map become Scourge Hooks. When facing a Scourge Hook within 60 meters of the killer can press F to detonate that Scourge Hook, inflicting a short duration 15% hit on all sides within 8 meters of that Scourge Hook. This sabotages the Scourge Hook and turns it into a regular hook. Immortal Evil then deactivates until a survivor is hooked, at which point a random hook becomes a Scourge Hook and Immortal Evil can be used again. And last but not least, we have perks for the new Jefe, Pablo Simon Bolivar. His first perk is Boon Walk Between Worlds. For as long as you're within the Boon's range, you see any auras that the killer could see. When the killer sees your aura, you see theirs briefly. If you are chased within the Boon's range, any windows that you block by vaulting them 3 times are also blocked from the killer for the same duration. Pablo's second perk is Invocation Warding Rates. Setting this up in the basement takes 30 seconds. Instead of breaking the survivor, the user's aura is revealed to the killer for a brief time whenever any survivor becomes unhooked. Once the invocation is complete, all survivors will receive the following benefits. Increases the endurance the survivor receives when unhooked by 12 seconds, removing survivor collision with the killer during this time period. And all survivors will see the auras of all survivors while any survivor is downed or hooked. And Pablo's last perk is El Brujo Especial. When you are healthy after becoming unhooked, El Brujo Especial will activate when you fast exit a locker. For up to 16 seconds you become invisible and silent, and your interactions become completely silent. You still leave blood stains but do not leave scratch marks, and if the killer is looking directly at you, you'll leave Chucky-style footprints following you with a delay of 1.5 seconds. El Brujo Especial will then deactivate until you are unhooked again. In short, it's Eye of Vecna with extra steps. Evil Dead is one of the most respected names in the world of horror. From its debut in 1981 to Evil Dead Rise, the newest movie in the series, the marks it's made on the genre have told far more of a tale than its box office or number of sequels might suggest. Rob Tappert, Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell are legends of the genre and have guided the world of Evil Dead for the past 40 years, and it's still going strong to show for it, arguably doing better than ever. Dead by Daylight has always described itself as a Hall of Fame of horror, and Evil Dead deserves a far better tribute in the world of asymmetrical horror than an outdated survivor, 3 shitty perks, and a fun but mismanaged multiplayer title that didn't even last 2 years. With Saber ceasing active development on Evil Dead the game, the obstacle that game presented to a reprising chapter in Dead by Daylight is gone, and the Asylum outfit and Ashi-Sashi lore in Tome 15 has shown the relationship between behaviour and Renaissance Pictures is still positive. So while I wouldn't count on Evil Dead getting a full chapter any day soon, all I can truly say is, why not? DBD is already going ham on licenses as it is, so why not call back someone you already have a good relationship with? Why not try again, to bring one of the best series in horror history to the game that's dedicating itself to memorialising that history? But until then, we always have Evil Dead the game to keep us occupied. Yes, even though Saber has stopped actively developing the game and delisted it from Steam, they haven't taken the servers down. You can still play it. Every feature about the game still works. As nothing else, the queue times for Demon are still way shorter than DBD's current killer queues. If you're interested in picking it up, a lot of third-party sites like Kinguin and Instant Gaming are still selling Steam keys for it, so you can take a look and download it for yourself. I played the game for background footage for this video, and I genuinely had a really good time. And there are permanent double spirit points, so the grind is way easier than it used to be. So whether we get a full Evil Dead chapter someday, or we just get to keep playing the ASIN that already exists until one day Saber quietly shuts the servers down, I'll be sticking with Evil Dead till the wheels fall off, and will take pride in the fact that at least the game's servers have lasted longer than Texas Chainsaw Massacres. Have fun on peer-to-peer, guys, and I'll see you next time.